Hello again, YouTube buddies. It is me, Brandon Hart, the ECOstruder, and well, what is there to say? I've got my notes, I've got my coffee, I've got a big 120X, and I've got a hankering to do a review video. So let's jump into it. Yeah, so this is part 2 of the Modix Big-120X review after a year. Yeah, I've been using this thing, doing a variety of different things, different types of print jobs, different modifications, different experimentation, all sorts of stuff with this machine for about a year now. This was one of the very first machines in the United States from Modix for their 120X version 3 run, and we'll talk about that. But basically what we've got going on here is a machine that has been pretty well dialed in, pretty well calibrated over the year I've been using it, getting it to the point where it is now functional and useful. So how did we get here? I was going to make this a kind of like the Big 60 version 2 review that I did after a year. I think we had like 3 different parts, 4 different parts, something like that to those videos. I don't think we need that many videos for this, so I'm going to try to pack a whole lot into this particular video. So bear with me as we speed through a bunch of stuff. First thing I thought we'd talk about is the assembly process. So I spent quite some time talking about the Big 60 version 2 and the assembly process of that. In fact, I filmed the entire thing and put it all out on YouTube as like a 6-part assembly process. I did in fact film the assembly of this one as well. We'll throw up some B-roll of what that looked like here while I'm talking, but bottom line, it's a fairly similar assembly process to what you saw with the Big 60 version 2, except it has been much improved. The assembly instructions are much better. The process for how things go together is much better. Specifically, you know, these corner brackets over here, the individual Z-axis corner brackets make putting this whole thing together a lot easier. The X-axis now being 2 separate motors on the X-axis, so there's not that big long rod running down the back of it, is a lot better than it used to be. So overall, the assembly process for these machines significantly improved over the version 2. The other nice thing about the way that these go together is with the enclosures. I don't know if there's a good example. Probably can't see any of these, so I'll flash up a picture. But there are these oval holes that are in the enclosure, and that allows you to put the enclosure panels on the machine and then add the T-nuts afterward by basically putting them in and sliding them over through each one of those oval holes. So you don't have to put all the T-nuts in exactly the right spot, put the enclosure panels on, and then screw it down. That is a tricky process and something that certainly takes a lot of time. So having those oval holes helps a whole heck of a lot. Other than that, you know, the doors are improved over the version 2. They have a frame on them now. You know, they can still get a little wiggly and wobbly, but these are not structural. So that's really not a problem. But the fact that there is a 2020 frame on the doors is a very nice thing. So again, when putting everything together, makes lining stuff up and making it work a lot easier. I will say, trying to get these frames exactly square, there is very tight tolerance between these 2 doors. I don't know if you can see that when I close them, but it is a bit tricky. Also, I think some of the newer batches came with magnets on the top as well as on the bottom. So you see how these kind of flop around a little bit. I think that was fixed in subsequent batches. Which brings me to maybe the main point of using this machine. The very first batch of these machines that went out had some issues, kind of like what you saw in the Big 60 version 2 videos. I got one of the very first one of those as well, and we had some first batch issues with missing holes, missing parts, things like that. Not too terribly bad, but inconvenient. We have some of those similar things going on with this particular machine as well, mostly due to the configuration files were a little off. They've all been updated now. There was no lighting, so you might see that our lighting flickers in here a little bit. That's because we put it together ourselves and didn't necessarily use the officially supplied Modix lighting. There's some flickering there. So there's just a few things that were kind of a little off being a first batch machine, but you know, we've built actually quite a few of these machines since then. In fact, off camera over here, we're building 2 big 180Xs for a customer right now, and I can tell you that process goes a lot smoother than this one did. So take that as you will, but first batch was a little bit tricky and a little bit less polished than subsequent batches have been. So we have done some modifications, like I mentioned, with the lighting. We need to modify it again, clearly, because some of our lights are actually burning out. But we added lighting to this one because it didn't originally come with it. We added this tubing right here, which I'm going to actually take a second to talk about this. So this tubing, this is Capricorn XS filament guide tube. And we use specifically the 2.85 version, so the kind that's meant for the bigger diameter filament. We still use 1.75, and I would highly recommend everybody stick with 1.75. Shoot me a note if you want to have that conversation about why I suggest that, but for now, 1.75, but a 2.85 guide tube, because it is just a guide tube, just guiding filament into the hot end. The original tubes that come with these machines are white, and they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're fine. But because of the distance that the filament is being pulled through, pulling all the way through this tube, all the way back here, over to the side where the filament is mounted on the spool holders, pulled through the filament detection sensor, and then down into the print head, that's a long distance. And this is just a 120X. The 180Xs are even longer. That's a long distance to pull any kind of filament. And we have noticed that while PTFE itself doesn't have a lot of friction, when you add it up over that full distance, the friction is substantial. And so we would have our Titan extruders here grinding into, chewing into the filament rather than actually pushing it through the hot end. That problem is made significantly worse when you use larger size spools. We're regularly running 10 kilogram spools on this thing because the parts we're printing are big and they use a lot of material. So yeah, we wrestled with a lot of different solutions, I guess you could call them, potential solutions, including this system right here, which is something that Modix officially provides on the big 180Xs. And I really, really like this solution. So the filament tube follows the print head and stays up for the most part out of the way. So this is a great system right here, but we still had a lot of issues with the friction from the guide tube. By switching to this Capricorn tubing, we didn't eliminate all those problems, but it is a lot slipperier than the original PTFE guide tube. And as a result, we can pull filament through this a lot smoother and a lot easier. I've talked to a few other customers who have similar problems, and basically, here's, I guess, the disclaimer part. We went ahead and reached out to Capricorn, and because this works so well, I signed this up as a Capricorn reseller, so we actually sell this stuff and have specified lengths that customers would need to modify their Modix machines the way we've modified ours on the website. I'm sure there's a link popping up down here below. But I just wanted to throw this out, and if you notice that this is a different color than yours, there's a reason for that, and I would suggest this upgrade because it's pretty simple. Just replace it with the Capricorn tubing, and it flows a lot easier. Yeah, we did some other things too. We've actually got a hole in the top of the enclosure where we can feed extra difficult filament through. So particularly flexibles, will feed directly down through the top of the enclosure and into the hot end. It's just never going to pull properly through this big long length, especially some of the like the Flex Mark 7 that we sell. It's just, you know, Shore 70A is just way too soft to expect to pull it through that big tube. So we have a hole in the top that will pass filament through. We've also completely upgraded all the hot ends and the E3D hardware on this machine so that it's able to reach much higher temperature. It's the higher quality components. You know, we're an E3D reseller, so that's easy for us, and we can just simply pop stuff on there. So that was one of the things we did right out of the gate. Just never even used the original hardware, went with E3D stuff right away. Okay, so those are most of the modifications we've done. There are some other experimental things like having a geared X-axis to help with some layer shifting, and also to reduce the amount of strain on the steppers themselves. One thing that we did encounter, we did, you know, wrong with our assembly ourselves, and I've talked to some customers who've done the same thing. These belts back here, it's very, very easy because they are so long, it's very, very easy to over tighten them. And if you over tighten them, these NEMA 17 steppers are not able to turn properly. The shaft basically encounters too much resistance, and you'll start getting layer shifting very, very quickly and easily because the stepper motor simply cannot keep turning the stepper shaft with all that stress, that lateral stress pulling on the shaft. So the best way to eliminate that is to disconnect the stepper from the belt tension and have it set up as a geared stepper this way. Downside to that, they're very loud now. These things have to run a lot faster because it's geared, and as a result, they tend to be quite noisy. But they're pretty strong, and we don't have any issues with the belts being too tight or anything like that anymore. So not necessarily sure whether I would say this is the best solution, but it is a solution, and it's one that's working well for us. Okay, so with that said, layer shifting was in fact one of the things that we struggled with the most. So I'm just going to talk about some of the issues we've had, whether they're issues you are likely to encounter as somebody who's actually getting these machines in a newer batch than ours, and how we fixed them. So basically, layer shifting is kind of the big one. We had quite a few parts that we would start printing, and for one reason or another, the print head would get caught on the part, or it would be moving too fast and it would skip a step or something like that. And essentially, we would layer shift. The whole part would be printing, and then all of a sudden the whole thing is printing, you know, one layer over. Usually in X, but we did have it in Y as well. Again, going with the geared stepper setup on the X-axis has pretty much eliminated any X-axis layer shifting. We still do very rarely now have some layer shifting on Y. But the biggest solution that we got to this was I reached out to Modix support, and they said that, hey, your config file is out of date. You're using an older one. So we upgraded the config file from the Modix customers zone website, same way anybody could do it. And once we were running the 1.4 version of the config file, most of the layer shifting issues went away magically. So that helped a lot. Again, it's still possible to happen. If you get a big blob on your part or something and the nozzle comes along and hits it, it's probably going to skip a step. So best way to compensate for that is not to have blobs on your part. So make sure that you've heat tightened your nozzle, make sure that you're not over extruding on the part, and shouldn't have any kind of issues like that. Again, 1.4 is the standard version now, so this is probably not an issue that most people are going to have going forward, but it is one we encountered because we were using an earlier version of the config. Let's see. Oh, we also had our ball screws complaining a whole lot as we were initially starting to use this machine. I have to think back to that now because it's been quite a while since we fixed that problem. But what we figured out was that actually one of my customers figured out that the ball screws were actually bottoming out inside of the 4040 extrusions. There's a hole cut in the 4040 extrusion so that the ball screw base or end can settle down in there and helps with alignment, helps make sure you don't really have to, measure where things line up. It's very specifically shown to you with the location of the drilled hole. But instead of it just poking through the top, it was actually hitting the center core of that 4040 extrusion and was just grinding into the 4040, which made it very squeaky. It also made it so that the movement on the Z-axis was inhibited because it was causing a lot of friction, as you might imagine. Once we figured that out, we just raised it up a little bit, so we got it off of that center piece. Squeaking went away, Z-axis issues mostly went away as well. Again, not an issue in the newer machines. I've only heard of people having that problem from the very first batch, so probably not something that anybody else would have a problem with. Already talked about the PTFE tubing, and the other thing I will mention, and I'm not sure what this is due to, but we have had our bed heater go out on us a few times. So these are fused. So there's just a fuse in the back. You can simply pop a new fuse in and continue running. But when we have been running this thing very, very hot, admittedly probably hotter than what Modix would recommend, we were running the beds at 115 for extended periods of time when printing very large ABS parts that really, really wanted to warp up on the edges. We were running the bed very, very hot to compensate for that. And after running it for long periods of time, eventually the bed heater went out. It died. And we figured out it was a bad fuse, got some fuses from DigiKey, replaced it, popped it back in, everything was pretty much good to go. Took us a while to figure out that's what it was, but once we did, we were able to replace it, and everything was fine. So just word to the wise, I guess, maybe don't run your bed heater that high for a long period of time, or these slow blow fuses on the back of the bed heater might, well, blow. So just something to keep in mind there. If you're running PETG, if you're running even ABS at reasonable temperatures, you're probably not going to have that issue, but it is something we encountered because we were abusing it. We were pushing it a little harder than it needed to be. Okay, that's kind of the list of the issues that we've had with this machine. We did one other thing that I'll point out because it's cool, and that is we added the Duet 5 expansion board onto the machine and now have individual control of each one of the 4 Z-axis stepper motors. So when the machine is doing its initial mesh bed leveling and it's probing each one of the spots on the bed, we actually have the ability now to have the machine go ahead and adjust the bed itself so that it's flat without us having to do that. That is something that is standard in some of the bigger machines like the 180X and the big meter, but is not something that is enabled by default because the Duet board is not included with the 120X or the big 60 or the big 40 or the 120Z. In this case, it's a really, really cool upgrade to be able to do, and it gives us more functionality beyond just that, but that is probably the one thing I can point at as being super cool and awesome. So initially this will come with essentially one output for all 4 motors. I think technically it is one stepper driver, 2 different cables, one that goes to each side. And so that one stepper driver is driving all 4 of these motors. So you really can't have it control each one. We added the Duet 5, ran individual cables to each one of these motors, and are now able to automatically level the bed. And I think that is awesome. Now is the moment that you've actually been maybe fast forwarding through this video to get to, and I don't blame you, I do the same thing sometimes too, but let's talk about overall review. How do I actually like the machine? Is it a good machine? You know, would I recommend it? You know, again, I'm a reseller of Modix machines, so yeah, I'm gonna recommend it, but that's also because there's a reason why I am a reseller of Modix machines when I use so many of them. I have quite a few of these, and we have built quite a few of these. For example, I've got this Big-120X, Big-40, Modix Big-60 version 2, a pair of Big-180Xs, assembly in progress. So yeah, so I've got several machines to kind of draw upon with my experience, and those are machines we're using, machines we've built, machines we've assembled and sent out to customers and then supported those customers using. So yeah, I mean, spoiler, yes, I do recommend it, but with some caveats. These machines are definitely not for everybody. They're not. This is not the same thing as your desktop printer that you might be using at home. It is more complicated, not necessarily because there's a whole lot more going on, just because it is bigger, and that matters. It really does. When you're printing bigger items and you know, your travel speed going from one end to the other side can substantially add to the amount of time that your part takes to print. That matters. If you get 4 days into a part and then you get a layer shift and the whole part is ruined, that matters. If you are trying to level your bed on your Ender 3 and you know, you think it's pretty frustrating that there's a low spot or that one side is a little bit higher than the other one or whatever, imagine doing that times, you know, 1200 millimeters, like what we've got on the 120X. That matters. So it definitely is something to keep in mind. These are not machines for beginners. This is going to require time and attention, but if you know what you're doing, if you understand 3D printing, these machines can turn out some excellent parts, some very, very beautiful parts. We'll show some pictures of some of the parts here as I'm talking, but basically, you know, these things, actually I've got one right here. Hey. So here's the energy sword from Halo, and this was actually one of the very first prints we did on this machine. It's printed in 2 halves, as you can see there. And this was one of the very first prints we did. So before we even had anything dialed in and fully calibrated, it was already producing pretty awesome parts. And you know, being a Halo nerd, this is super fun to be able to do, because that's just simply not going to be possible on some of the smaller machines, not at that scale anyway. All right, so I guess first thing is not really something people need to worry about, but first batch is maybe not the one to jump on. Wait until maybe the second batch, and a lot of things get fixed or addressed between batches at Modix. That's one of the awesome things they do. They listen to a lot of customer feedback. The assembly guide has a feedback section at the bottom of each page, so you can tell them, hey, this was confusing, or you know, I got this part wrong because it looked like the instructions were telling me to do something else, whatever. And they do make changes and updates to different batches and so on to improve the experience for customers. So I really like that. And you only get that if you're getting one of the machines that is not in the first batch. So that's something to keep in mind. That said, once you get the thing fully dialed in, fully calibrated, it will print beautiful parts. Absolutely will. You all know that I have been very happy with my Big-60 version 2, if you've watched my previous videos. And the print quality that we can get on this machine blows that print quality out of the water. Again, for printing very big parts very quickly, the Big-60 V2 does a great job, but the print quality for parts on the 120X V3 is way better. And I think a lot of that is due to the Duet 2 Wi-Fi control board that's running everything with the TMC stepper drivers, higher quality linear rails, the better construction, better design of the frame, things like that. But overall, the result is you get really good print quality out of these things. It can be very quiet when it's printing. In its stock form, it's pretty quiet. Again, it's not so quiet when you run the stepper motors at 3 times their normal speed. But yeah, it can be quiet right out of the box, and so things can be nice for that. The lighting, you know, again, don't judge the lighting by what we've got going on here. This was a totally, you know, bodged together lighting job that I just found some LEDs that I had laying around from my various electronics projects, and we hooked those into the bed heater output on this machine, so it had enough juice to power them all. Half of them are dead now. So this is not what you should expect for lighting, but the new lighting is an LED strip that goes across the top lid here. It's okay. I think the lighting, you know, if you use the bed heater output like we did, I think you can add more lights and get more coverage of your build chamber than what the default system is, but it's nice that it includes lighting anyway. Oh, one other thing I should mention too, the Duet 2 Wi-Fi is great if you've got good Wi-Fi coverage. There are some of you that don't, and for those of you that don't, you can absolutely just drop in a replacement with the Duet 2 Ethernet. Now you will have to unplug everything from the Duet 2 Wi-Fi board that it comes with and plug it back into the Duet 2 Ethernet. So be very careful about where you're plugging things back in. But then you have a wired network connection to your machine, and that can be a nice way to do it. Also, with these bigger machines, it really matters whether your floor is level. So it's a good idea to put it where it's going to be, lower the rubber feet on the industrial casters here to the floor, make sure everything is set, and then print. If you ever move the machine and put it back, you're probably going to have to re-level, and so that's something to keep in mind. That's just due to the fact that you've got a big machine and not all floors are perfectly level. But you know, this thing is built to be very, very modular, so you can modify, you know, your print heads. We're doing some experimentation around with the E3D Chimera, and you know, we can do that because of the way that these things are designed to work. We can independently swap out things, change tool heads, do different types of upgrades. The community has done quite a few experimental upgrades and testing and things like that. So the design of these things allows for that, and that's one of the things I absolutely love about them. It's also hard to overstate how much quality, components, print quality, and just overall size, you know, build volume that you're getting with these machines for the money. You know, if you were going to spend $100,000 on a machine, or $500,000, I don't even know what some of these other ones cost now, but you could probably get better results with some of those really, really expensive machines. However, you're not going to be able to modify it yourself, and you're also going to spend a lot more money. So for what you're getting at the price, it is pretty incredible. So kudos to Modix for putting together, you know, again, name brand components. These are all E3D hot end parts, Gates belts, IGUS chain flex wiring, Duet 2 Wi-Fi and panel do, touchscreen displays, Highwind linear rails. I mean, you name it, this thing is rocking the name brand stuff. So I really, really think that is impressive for the price point that these things come in at. Again, I have to reiterate this. I know I already said it, but these things are not for beginners. If you are not experienced with 3D printing, then, you know, this may seem very, very tempting, but buy yourself a desktop machine. Start printing with a desktop machine. Learn how to resolve clogs and do troubleshooting and replace a broken, you know, hot end or whatever the case may be. Do that stuff first before you jump into a Modix printer. These are excellent performers as long as you know what you're doing. So I have to throw that out there again. Okay, so with that said, I think you guys get the idea. The machine, you know, may require a little bit of tinkering. Definitely spend your time on the calibration steps of the assembly guide. But once you have the machine fully dialed in, fully calibrated. It is a performer. It prints excellent print quality. And yes, in fact, I do highly recommend the Modix 3D printers. So with that being said, thank you very much for watching. I know this is one of the longer videos. I actually do a lot of longer videos, so I guess this isn't really one of the longer ones I do, but it is one of the longer ones on YouTube. So thanks for making it to this point in the video. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and click the little bell to be notified when new episodes are posted so you don't miss those. I am trying to do more of them here in 2021 as we go forward. So hopefully you'll see a bit more content on the ECOstruder channel. If you have more questions, more comments about the Modix machines or about any sort of eco-friendly 3D printing, I would love to hear about it. You can either shoot it to ECOstruder@heartsmartproducts.com, or you can drop it in the comments below so that everybody can benefit from your questions as well. So with that being said, I really want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.